Ian, it's Kurashige, right?
Hey, we are live.
Kurashige.
Welcome to episode 47 of the Team House. We are here tonight with Ian Kurashige. He is a former 1st Ranger Battalion combat medic, served overseas. He has also done a bunch of humanitarian work abroad over in Nepal, and we'll talk to him about that as well. And today he works in public health policy. So we're also going to talk to him about that and about, as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's a whole lot of things we're going to get into tonight, I think. And this is also the historic moment where all 3 Ranger battalions are finally represented on the Team House. Dave, you can see him, we got these Brady Bunch squares going, co-host over there, Dave Park. Dave was a 2nd Ranger Battalion guy back in the day when Rangers still had black berets. What years were you in 2nd Ranger Battalion, Dave?
97, 2000. I left in 2000.
Okay. I was in 375, 3rd Ranger Battalion from 2003 to 2006. And then Ian, you were in 1st Ranger Battalion from what years?
2010 to 2014.
So there you go. We were all in, even the time frames don't quite overlap. So we each have a variety of somewhat different experiences, different times, different battalions. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. But Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. I'm really happy to have you on. And I think that, you have a really unique experience, a unique perspective that you're going to be able to share with us. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and it's great to be here. I live in Brooklyn, so there's not a lot of former battalion guys around here, but it's good to chat with about the old days. So
there might be more than you think, though, and I might have to introduce you to some people, later on. There is a if not a platoon-sized element, there is a sizable amount of ex-Rangers that are hanging out in New York City.
Okay.
Jack and I actually met at a Ranger meetup.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
So Ian, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you find yourself into Ranger Battalion? Like, did you grow up in Brooklyn? How did all this come about? Did you fall in with the wrong kids in high school and a federal judge told you it's the Army or jail? I mean, how did that happen?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's very much like complete opposite. So like I say this not as a point of boasting, but we always say that there's smart Rangers and strong Rangers. And I was very much like the smart Ranger because I was not a strong Ranger. So like I had to be the other kind of guy. And so I grew up in San Diego. My dad was in the military, but he was in the military. He was drafted during Vietnam and did like this technician role and was in the Army during the mid 70s when it was a really bad time. Like he would tell me stories about gang activity in the barracks and officers needing MP escorts to go and do inspections, and just like because these barracks were basically, they were like active like gangs just controlling large sections of installations. And so when I said I was thinking about the military, after I woke up, like I'm sure not all of us are kind of saw 9/11 happen, and I was like, this is a world-changing event. This is going to affect the course of our country and the course of our lives, and I wanted to make sure that I was contributing in a way that I felt was positive. And so I was like, I'm gonna go join the Army, and my dad was like, fuck you. Because he was like, I mean, he was like, that's absolutely not what you want to do. You, at the very least, you want to go in as an officer. And I was like, go to college first. So I was like, okay, I'll go to college first. So I actually graduated high school, went to college, was in ROTC, and got closer and closer to graduating. I was like, I don't think I want to be an Army officer. I do not want to make a career about this. And I had the benefit that only like just starting at my generation had, where we could actually go on these forums and hear guys who'd served like from earlier generations, like Dave, talk about their experiences and talk about what the pros and cons were of like should I do an 18 X-ray contract and try and go straight off the street into special forces? Should I go to Ranger Bat? And for me, I had always been juggling these two ideas where I wanted to do something in international affairs, foreign policy after, especially after that formative experiencing 9/11, and then wanting to do something in the medical field. And so thinking about my options, it just seemed like the best pipeline that would get me to that kind of and see if this was truly what I wanted to do would be going for that Ranger contract to enlist and with as a medic. And so that would give me, the first half of what the 18 Deltas do in the Special Forces program, assuming of course that I pass RIP and by the time I got there was the RASP program had been initiated. And that just seemed more and more appealing to me. And so I actually disenrolled from ROTC, which is a very, very intense process. Like it requires like the 1-star commander to like sign off on it.
What makes it intense? Like, do they kind of grill you about why you want
Yeah,
to?
exactly. Yeah. So at that point I had actually signed on. I was getting like, I was pretty much committed as you can be in the ROTC program towards being an officer. I was like, this is not really the path for me. This is not something that's going to help. Like, this is not what I want to do, and this is probably not where I'm going to fit in best. And so I wanted to step away from that and say, no, I'm going to reorient myself, and I really want to focus on being able to do this special operations mission, which there's no guarantee. You just get no guarantee whatsoever that you can do if you're an officer. Like, even if you're a top performer as in the ROTC program, you might still end up being assigned to the transportation branch or something like that.
Right. Sure.
Good, because like they need good officers. Every branch needs good officers, obviously. But you just don't have the same amount of control over your career, at least initially. And I knew, especially after hearing this experience from my dad about his experience in the regular army, that I wanted to do the special operations thing. Like, I wanted to be there with the best. And so that's what I ended up doing. And so after I graduated college, I enlisted. The perk of enlisting with a 4-year degree is you come in immediately as a specialist. Not that it really matters in battalion, but like it meant that like I was like a few years older. The drill sergeants, they let me teach the CQB battle drill during basic training because like they were all arguing because they all came from different units and had different SOPs, and they're like, you know what, just make the fucking this guy over here, ROTC cadet, do it.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll do it. So it was definitely like a different experience, but I had already gone to airborne school as a ROTC cadet.
Okay.
Over the summer.
So yeah, I did a summer swing by through the airborne school, and again there being on Fort Benning, soon to be renamed, inshallah. We like seeing the reverence people had towards that brown fence around down at the end of the road. Like, stay away from there.
That's because they're violent and they're dangerous.
Yeah, they're violent and they're dangerous. I was like,
we always took that as a point of pride.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, when Ian's talking about being a specialist, it's a rank or a pay grade. It's a rank in the Army. It's an enlisted 4. Which is not nothing. I mean, it takes some people a couple of years to get there. But when you show up to Ranger Battalion, unless you've been to Ranger school, it doesn't matter what rank you are.
The sham shield.
Yeah. And then the brown fence, near airborne school is what surrounded Ranger, the Ranger Battalion. So
if you go up the hill from Ranger school, on your right-hand side, that you will get to where back in my day, the Ranger Indoctrination program was on the right-hand side, and then you go a little bit past that, and there's there's this brown fence that encircles 3rd Ranger Battalion and regimental headquarters.
Exactly. And yeah, so that's a great clarification, Dave, for like the listeners that aren't aware. It's like special operations is like being on a base inside the base. Like it really is like
it's a subculture.
Signs. Yeah, it's a subculture. There's big signs everywhere that say "fuck off," lethal force will be authorized. Like I don't know who would do that. Like it's like lethal force. We all, but
the MPs did it just like 6 months ago. They were on that 375 compound, thought they were going to play fuck games with the Ranger privates, and they got balled up. This just happened like not even 6 months ago.
Lost the sensitive item is no.
It might have happened in late 70s too, where there was an event, a disagreement between Rangers and MPs, which turned into a big kerfuffle out in the 2nd Battalion, like major. But because all the Rangers were wearing black PTs and their balaclavas, like when the MPs were brought forward to identify the culprits, it was tough.
There's some pretty famous incidents. There's the whole Phoenix City thing where the boys rolled over there and they were gonna fuck up some frat boys. What was there's that big shootout, 275 had a shootout with the drug dealers.
Yeah.
Yes. And that nobody got hit, which was an embarrassment to all Rangers involved.
And then there's the famous 275 bank robbery.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm sorry, I hijacked the conversation. Ian, pick it up there, man.
Yeah.
Actually,
Ian, just out of curiosity, when you said you didn't want to be an officer, was it only because you didn't have like the 100% control to pick your direction, or doing ROTC did you find that being in a leadership role and more hands off on just the straight tactical stuff was less appealing to you than being like the operator?
That's a great question. I'd say it's definitely a little bit of both. There was from the career aspect to really get the benefit of being an officer and actually be able to give back benefit to the Army. Like you need to do it it's not like being enlisted where you can learn your job really well in about 6 months to a year and then be giving back those next 3 years, or if you do a 6-year the longer. It's like in order to like just think about that new 2nd lieutenant that has to be trained up by their platoon sergeant to get to the level where they're truly the platoon leader and not a figurehead that's actually the platoon sergeant is operating through. It takes a lot of time and a lot of on-the-job training, and it really suits both the individual and the Army better if you do it as a career where you stay in for, like, I would say minimum like 8 years active duty if you choose the active duty route. And like seeing that I wanted to, I was like many young 20 somethings, I was like, no, I want to get to it. I want to do this. And I knew pretty early on, this is not the final thing that I want to do with my life. I want to do this for a time. I want to make a meaningful contribution to my country and then go on and do something else. So I was immediately thinking, if I'm going to be in this time limited space, I want to learn a skill, a set of skills. I want to be with like an elite team, and then I want to go on my way and go on to do something else. What ended up actually happening was it turned out that even though I'd done a lot of research and I thought I knew what I was getting into and I felt like I would like it a lot, I actually ended up loving it. It was, I truly loved being a Ranger medic. Just even if it was doing like the primary sick call stuff and like helping like all these truly elite warriors figure out what was the matter with them. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's basic musculoskeletal stuff, but sometimes we get like a sniper who had a metabolic issue, or some guy who had a thyroid condition, and these were like conditions that would have otherwise moved them into probably getting med boarded, but that the military and the Army was like, these guys have been highly trained and we want to retain them. And so we have faith in the medics of the Ranger battalions to keep these guys safe and help them continue doing their job and continue performing. And so after, as I arrived at this big scary fence, and I actually had to go up to I just arrived on Benning and had to go knock on the airborne liaison because I actually didn't know where I was supposed to go. Because everybody else gets orders to airborne school, and I just got orders to report to RIP or RASP. And so I was like, I don't know how to get on the compound safely without somebody hurting me.
Yeah.
So I go over to the airborne liaison, I knock on their door. They're like about to head out for lunch. So they're like, just wait here. And they like go out like 3 hours. They have me, I go to parade rest, and then like 3 hours later they come back and they're like, oh yeah, you're still here. All right, take your stuff. You got a POV? That's weird. Okay, take it down to the end of the fence. You'll see a bunch of guys smoking, joking, looking like assholes. And those are with shaved heads, and those are the guys that are in the RASP. They'll tell you where you need to go. And so that began my journey. The last RIP class was starting then, and I went into the hold until the third RASP class. The transition, I don't know, have you guys talked about RIP before? I feel like maybe
really, no.
That might be a good place.
We try to keep it on kind of the focus on the guests, but since we are kind of having this transgenerational moment here of reminiscing, but maybe Dave, you want to pick it up and talk a little bit about what it was like when you went through, and then I'll pick it up, and then we can go over to Ian and hear about RASP.
Well, you guys already know what it was like when I went through. It was hard, unlike anything you guys did. RIP, when I went through, was the Ranger Indoctrination program. And if you were not an NCO, and if you had never been to Ranger Battalion, you would go to RIP. And I believe it was 4 weeks. I can't really remember now, but it was essentially a combination of sort of a ball dragger, just hammering you with these, super fast rucks or long rucks. But it was also at the same time trying to teach you just the basics that you would need when you showed up to your line platoon, to your fire team, how Rangers, shoot, move, and communicate essentially. Because it's different, I had been in the Marines and done the Marine. I wasn't an infantry, but I'd been through the Marine sort of combat training, where they turn every Marine into an infantry soldier or into an infantry Marine. But the whole I'm up, I'm down, I'm up, he sees me, I'm down. The whole movement to fire, or movement to contact, was so fast and was such a revelation. Like it's a full on sprint half the time. But those are the types of things that they would teach you, just so when you showed up, you would have the bare necessity or the bare bones to go on. And then at the end of RIP is when you got your orders to which battalion, and they'd have little competitions, like whoever could hang from the bar for the longest got to pick their orders and stuff like that. But yeah, so that was what it was like when I went through. We were fed, it wasn't like Ranger School where you weren't fed. And you had your weekends off, if I remember right. But yeah.
So I went through RIP it was the summer of 2003, and 3-week course, right there on Fort Benning, on the compound I was describing earlier. The first, week or so, 2 weeks, especially. So I think the first week there's a lot of physical events, as I recall. You do the APFT, you do your 12-mile ruck march, you do all that kind of stuff. And then you go out to Cole Range and you're out there for like 3 or 4 days. And we did land navigation, and they keep you up all night, smoking the hell out of you. I mean, it was just a torture fest, a 3-week torture fest, essentially, just smoking the ever living shit out of you. And then the last week you do a little bit more of like instruction. So you learn a little bit of combat lifesaver, giving each other IVs. We did some classroom work on marksmanship, but we never went out to the range. You do Ranger history classes, and then of course like psych exams, things like that. Right. You do the fast rope tower. There is trying to give you a little introduction to all of this stuff. But it primarily is just a smoke fest. It's just a gut check to see like, hey, do you have the balls to do this? Or are you going to hang in there, with everybody else? It was, I mean, I think it was a good course. I think it weeded out the people who probably didn't need to be there. But however, from talking to the younger Rangers who since when I went through, the Ranger Indoctrination program has become the Ranger Assessment and Selection program that Ian will talk about. But I think that you guys, the younger guys, are much, much better trained in their selection program than I was. Like, you guys are getting a lot more out of it. So I give credit to the Ranger Regiment for that they have upped their own standards from when I went through. And I think that soldiers are showing up at their battalions with an elevated level of training and preparedness for combat.
Yeah, that's basically, I'd say I went through RAS in like one of the very first RAS classes. It was the third one. And
what year was this?
2010.
Okay.
Yep. So, the Army does a thing where fiscal year starts in October. So like the first two were in 2009, and then I was the first one in 2010. And then the first four, it was in 2 phases. The first 4 weeks were very much like the experience that Jack was talking about, kind of a cross between Dave and Jack's experience. First couple weeks are physical assessments, a combination of physical assessments, and then interspersed with Ranger history and all those other kind of things, basically anything that they can quiz you on. And then a lot of just like doing PT in the morning or thinking that you're doing, like they had a program where they were saying, oh, we're going to do a 3, 6, 9, 12 mile. We're going to work our way up to the 12-mile road march. But that meant that the 3-mile road march, they basically just took off on a sprint for, and like the 6 and the 9 as well. And then like the 12-mile, they're like, oh, well, this is a formal assessment. So I guess, you kind of do it at your own pace, whatever, like very begrudgingly. But then Cole Range was week 3. And I think there was 4 days, 3 nights, 4 days out there. And then that last week was the CLS, the Ranger Combat Lifesaver, or RFR, Ranger First Responder Program. The medical aspects, and then a few other assessments. And then we moved into the second phase, and the second phase was everything changed. I think part of this was the RASP instructors were still trying to figure out how they should treat the the candidates at that point, because you're still being evaluated, but it wasn't supposed to be like the RIP style smoke fest anymore. Like at this point, you generally, if you made it to that point, like that 2/3 that get cut off of every RAS class, like 90% of that was gone at the end of phase 1. And so at that point, they were really like, we're here to train you now. We're here to be your temporary team leader, except honestly kind of nicer than what the actual battalion team leaders treat people like. It's like, and maybe this might have changed, but it was like, at the end of the training day, it was like, okay, go do whatever. At the weekends, like go do whatever. Because the first phase, we were on lockdown give up your cell phones, everything, shaved heads. And then they were like, start growing your hair out now. We don't want you coming to battalion with like big dumb army short like haircuts. We want you to start looking like operators. Not quite that, but then there was marksmanship training for a week. It was mobility training for a week. And with marksmanship, they did both rifle and pistol. I'm trying to think what other elements were involved in it.
Ballistic breaching, right?
Yes, the breaching. I totally forgot about the breacher course. Yeah, that was honestly a lot of fun because, like as a medic, I got breacher, get the basic breacher certification, and then like from then on, every platoon sergeant I worked with was like, no, don't touch the explosive, get out of here, and like you go wait for somebody to blow their hand off, and then you come in. Like it was very much like this is like, but at that point it was everybody's hands-on, everybody's getting trained, everybody's getting familiarized. We got to play with like the dual tube nods and like do a night marksmanship course and start figuring out all those things that are like just living under night vision, which becomes kind of the heart and soul of a ranger. Later on in their, when you're actually going out on target, you get to start doing that. And I never forget, we had this marksmanship instructor. I wish I could remember his name, but he was like, "Men, fuck with your shit. Like, go into your rooms, turn out the lights, and fuck around with your shit to like learn how to use it, and like make all the mistakes, and like don't shine it in each other's eyes, but like play around with it so that you can figure this stuff out now, because you're gonna figure out way better on your own." In this rare opportunity that you have when you're locked down under the compound and you don't have to worry about turning it back into the armory, then you can play with this stuff on a long-term basis, and you can kind of figure out all this really technical stuff. That's like, because a ranger is, at least in the modern era, has been first and foremost a night fighter, and being able to develop those skills and learn how to get around, move around, like trip over furniture and get around a dark room under nods and with in the equipment, it starts that process that you don't even realize it's so important, but at that point it was great. And so, but by the end of that 4 weeks, you feel really well trained. And then as a medic, I graduated, and I had a really great moment where we did the graduation down at Freedom Hall, and my dad who had been so nervous about his army experience, got to see that this was a little bit different kind of army.
Right.
Like this was, there's not graffiti all over the barracks. Like there's not like there's shenanigans, but it's not like that 70s situation. And he actually was the one who put my scroll on me. It's a lot easier, during my era, because we had the Velcro. So, but I got to. I put on the tan beret, and then I was sitting. Then I started working in sick call in this weird limbo period until I got to go to SOCM, the Special Operations Combat Medic course, which is the first half of what the 18 Delta Special Forces Medic course does. It's focused on basic. Both the basic lifesaver kind of training and as well as more advanced combat trauma, and starts to get into the basic, like low level but high impact surgical interventions that can help with trade and on target.
For people who don't understand, sort of like, for military trauma training and things like that, would you rate that on the level of an EMT, of a paramedic, of an ER nurse, an ER doctor? Like, where would you put that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've had the experience to talk with because at the time I'd only known EMTs and paramedics, and now that I've once I got to work with PAs and doctors and flight paramedics, I would say there's within the realm of this battlefield trauma point of care contact, there's really no comparison. You're like kind of a flight paramedic in the little ways of some of their skill sets, but there's also things that, you know, only really a trauma surgeon would typically do that you get at least that you get trained on and are expected to be able to do, even though there tends to be more rare that those kind of really advanced interventions are performed, but it's still part of the expectation.
I mean, this is jumping ahead a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about the SOCM course, but as a military, you know, combat medic in Ranger Battalion, you actually, I mean, do you have a little bit more leeway than, let's say, even an ER doctor to do some things that may be quote unquote experimental, but maybe wouldn't take place stateside?
Yeah, so I would say it's not so much, it's experimental in one way, in that we get to use interventions that are not generally available to paramedics or even physicians in the US, because they're not really necessary. Like a physician in the US working at a major trauma center has access to a huge supply of hopefully, I mean, even though right now, shout out, please go donate blood. There's a big shortage right now. They have access to a blood bank. The only blood bank that a Ranger medic has access to on target is the other Rangers. And so, like, I'd have a little quarterback thing with my roster and everybody's blood types, and I knew that if somebody got hit, we would initiate a warm, fresh whole blood transfer, and that was an intervention that would just, there's no real need to use it in the US because you have access to higher standard of care. That being said, it's not really experimental either, because it's been done for a really long time. It's been done on battlefields since Vietnam at least. I think even earlier. There were some other interventions like freeze-dried plasma that are proved the French use in a military setting, and we got permission from the FDA to use. And that was one of the cool things too, is working with the Ranger medics. We had and USASOC, the United States Army Special Operations Command, has actually a pretty special relationship with the Food and Drug Administration to give us permission, knowing and to create these research protocols to evaluate experimental products that we think could be able to help Rangers. So yes, there's experimentation happening, but I want to clarify, it's not like, you know, you're not saying like Doc Fisher or you know.
Yeah, I know it's not like
yeah.
Dr. Mengele crazy stuff going on.
Yeah,
but,
no,
you know, their techniques are able to.
Yeah, no, there's no mad scientist stuff going on. But there is definitely some truly experimental and cutting edge kind of interventions happening. Continuing today, I know there's a new low titer blood program that's being utilized, where basically keeping like kind of a kind of universal donor blood bank readily available on target, and that's amazing. Like I think even out to Jack's time frame, it was basically normal saline and Hextend. Like there wasn't a lot of use of other products, and Ranger medics, you know, both there's both the positive and the negative, that, you know, they see a more battlefield trauma than a lot of other organizations, even in special operations, and have a very high casualty count, but also have a very, very high success rate in terms of not allowing preventable deaths. So
yeah, and wars, I mean, if anything, wars are good for the progress of trauma care and prosthetics. You know, I mean, both of those fields advanced wildly after wars, you know, and during that process. And so you're saying that basically Ranger medics, special operations medics, and we've kind of talked about this before, are really, they're overtrained and underqualified for basically any job in the U.S. There's no job in the U.S. that really fits their niche. You know, they do way more stuff than a paramedic, but a lot, you know, but they're not doctors by any stretch. Or so when it's interesting because we were talking about this earlier, the three of us talking about, you know, you were talking about going in your room and messing with your gear. And Jack was saying that they had the gear, but they still had to do their TA-50. And the TA-50 is what you might imagine it to be, which is the government issue kind of HRNS or whatever else.
It's your road carrying equipment, your LCE.
Yeah.
And you guys, I mean, most of you probably remember that seeing it in Vietnam War movies where you have the OD green suspenders and the pistol belt and then all your shit on it. And yeah, I was telling the guys earlier, I was in Ranger Battalion in 2003 to 2006, and it was a time period where the Ranger Regiment was transitioning from being a light infantry unit, if you will, to a counterterrorism unit. It was transitioning from being a peacetime unit to being a wartime unit. And it was just funny that, you know, we had some newer modern gear that we would use in the field, but we still had this sort of vestigial aspect from the past where when you went down to the central issue facility, you would get issued all the same old gear that like had been used back in Dave's day. And like, as a private, I had to like do it all up, put all the pouches on the right way to the, as it says in the SOP handbook, and tie them down with 550 cord and burn the ends on my square knots. And then you just have that, and it's like in your wall locker, just sitting there. And it's like this vestigial thing from the past that was done out of tradition more than anything.
Yeah. And when I was there, that's what we used. There were about the time I was leaving, there were guys who were actually going. One of the nice things about being a 2nd Battalion and being so far away from the flagpole is, depending on what our chain of command was like, guys can get away with certain things that you wouldn't be able to get away with, like at Benning or maybe a Savannah. I don't know. I don't know how closely they were monitored. But so that's when guys first started going to like the tactical tailor, right? And they would get their WP bags or waterproof bags, which going into an old Army ruck used to be a hassle because you'd have your ruck, you'd put your woolly peat bag, your waterproof bag inside the ruck, and then you'd stuff all your stuff in it. Then you'd tie up the woolly peat bag, close your ruck. And so anytime you opened up your ruck, you'd have to untie your woolly peat bag and, you know, dig for your stuff. Well, they started having their woolly peat bags sewn into their rucks. And then they started taking like the LCE and having it like cut in the middle with like, you know, clips, fast text and stuff like that. They started experimenting, and nobody was smacking them down for it. But when I was there, it was just the initial we do CQB. Like, we would do it as an element, as a fire team or as a squad and as a platoon, but we were also still living with we're the best life infantry in the world thing. So our activities were very much split between going out, you know, to, you know,
patrol base activities.
Patrol base activities, exactly. Patrol, you know, and 30-mile road march, you know, week-long, you know, suck fest that were all outside. And there were quite a few, I guess, old-timers, they're post-Vietnam Rangers who didn't think that we should be doing airfield seizures and airfield seizures was another big one for us. And I don't know if that was still a big thing for you guys at the time.
That was like a thing we did because we had to do it. That's what felt like that felt a little vestigial for by the time we were getting it to it. Doing the airfield seizure was like, what? This is so different from what we do. 9 days out of 10. Why are we?
Before we jump into all that, I please finish your thoughts on SOCOM.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
I just want to wrap up, you know, your thoughts on going through the course, because I think, you know, we have some of the best trained medics in the world, really. And you know, if you could tell us a little bit about that experience. And like, I just remember some of my friends when I was in the Q course, and they'd have like the anatomy coloring book out, and they're like,
oh yeah,
yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I still have some of that stuff. It truly is a very cerebral course. I mean, I know there's other stuff at the Special Warfare Center in school that's also involves a lot of classroom work, but the first big section is very much designed to be to mirror as closely as is relevant, like a first year of med school, and has a really high failure rate. You know, it's something, even at that level, you're talking about every single person who shows up at this course. And it's one of the things I loved about it was that I got to sit in the classroom, and there was only a few other Rangers. It was mainly special forces guys, civil affairs guys and gals, and the Marine Recon individuals, the SEALs were there. It's basically everybody that goes there except for the PJs, and that have their own course that they do. And getting to interact at that joint environment, again, like I've just passed selection. I'm still just an untabbed private in battalion, not even at battalion yet, and I'm being sent off to this other base to train and interact with these peers who've also all passed various selections, and get to have that interaction and pass. And even with all those very high quality, highly motivated, very smart people, there's still a really high failure rate. It's still, I think, around 50% for the first part of the SOCM course. And or at least it was during when I went, and that's a big part of that's the academic portion is very difficult, and it ends with a gross anatomy pin test that's the same as what first year med students have to do, with a human cadaver out and like parts that are labeled, and you have to identify each individual part. And it's extremely difficult. But it's vital to be able to understand that underlying anatomy, because when it's, again, the Ranger operates in the dark, and being able to understand what part you're touching and what the underlying injuries might be and what the trauma mechanism might have caused are all so vital. And being able to think like that quickly and then relay it and begin communicating with the platoon sergeant and platoon leader so that they can start calling the necessary assets to move that individual to a higher level of care is all of kind of what we get paid to do. And being able to think at that level was exactly what I wanted to do. And that's when I really started falling kind of in love with what my job was as a special operations combat medic. So getting that level of training, and it's like a lot of special operations courses, there were international students there as well. So that was another cool thing. I mean, we had physicians from other militaries that were taking this course as well. So there's a lot of really intense elements. There's they've made it more with a tactical focus now towards the end. They've added in like doing the trauma lanes and the treatment of patients under night vision is something that they've incorporated now. But that when I went there, it was it was a little bit more vanilla, and that other kind of higher level stuff, that was what I learned when I actually got to battalion.
I was going to ask you about that, if they had prepped you for the environmental factors, because most likely it was at night. I mean, it might be cold, it might be raining, there's so much going on. And, how to tell if somebody's bleeding, if it's night, you're looking through night vision and they're wet because of the rain,
Yeah, there's a lot of those are kind of more the kind of tricks of the trade that I learned when I actually got to battalion, using non-red lights to be able to more easily identify pooling of blood on a patient, or and how to feel for it on the uniform and under the equipment in order to identify those injuries rapidly and be able to treat them. But yeah, the SOCM course was just it's every one of those individuals that was there from another military was trying to replicate the same kind of thing in their country and hoping they were going to get the resources to do it. But it's just hard to see because the amount of resources that were expended on training each individual student were just unparalleled.
I remember years ago I talked to a guy who's in the Australian Special Air Service, and he made this comment to me, which I think was very, very real, very honest. He's like, we're never going to be as good as you guys. And it's not because Australian SAS guys are not as strong or as tough or as smart or as dedicated. It's just the United States puts more money and more emphasis behind this than any other country. I mean, Australia, for instance, the last time I checked, they don't have a special operations aviation unit. Mm-hmm. That's a huge deal. I mean, that's how the guys get to where they're going. That's how they get to the objective. So if you don't have a aviation unit that can facilitate special operations, then you're kind of in a tight spot there. So it is a question of funding and money. And as Ian points out, what other country is going to spend as much money on every single special operations medic and put them through such an intensive course as what you went through?
Yeah. And there's the economy of scale too, because again, they're pooling all those, like it's pooling the SEALs, the special forces, the Marine Recon, the Army Rangers, and you get so many that it actually becomes, it becomes a little bit more efficient to train all those guys.
And we're also a much bigger country than say Austria, Slovenia, the UK. I mean, Pentagon has more money than God, so I mean they sneeze at the F-35. So I don't think training some combat medics is the end all be all for them.
Yeah. It's really interesting. What for, at least for the Rangers, what would happen to them if they didn't graduate that course? Would they still go back as line medics, or would they get booted from battalion? Or
there were rare exceptions where somebody had done a branch transfer as like a reenlistment thing. So like a guy had done his time in battalion and was like reenlisted and was like, I want to switch over to the medic side. And if they didn't pass, they might send them back to battalion and they could keep doing their thing. The rest of us, if we didn't make it, we didn't even leave Fort Bragg. It was we were going to 82nd.
82nd.
Yeah.
So there was motivation to study.
A lot of motivation. Like that was, I felt like I was really well prepared going into RASP, and I felt like I had a good chance. But at the end of the day, there's still injuries and things that can happen, and nothing's guaranteed. And so by that point I was like, wow, I actually made it through RASP. I do not want to fuck this up. And I worked my ass off to be able to get through that. I can honestly say that's probably, I've gone to graduate school. I have an undergrad degree. I've been to Ranger school. I went through RASP. I can say that SOCM course was the hardest thing that the most challenging for me personally, because of that combination of the intense academic, the military environment, the physicality as well required to be able to do all these things quickly and under a lot of pressure. I can honestly say that I've never been in a educational or academic setting that was that difficult.
That's amazing.
So, Ian, you reach your goal. You pass through SOCOM. You get assigned to 1st Ranger Battalion. Go be one of those cool guys out at Hunter Army Airfield. What's it like when you show up?
One of the best guys in the Army. I show up, and the battalion is overseas. So which as you might know is kind of a blessing, because it means that your immediate team leader isn't there to start smoking the ever-loving shit out of you the day that you arrive. that being said, like we were, I actually went there with a class. There were 2 other Ranger medics who showed up with me, and we were all just raring to go. We wanted to get out to our battalion, and they're like, well, we might send you on a min rotator, and then they're like, nah, we're not going to do it. So ended up staying around, but Ranger Rendezvous was happening. So Ranger Rendezvous is happening. If you don't know what Ranger Rendezvous is, it is part like it's the Burning Man for Rangers. It's just
exactly.
Yeah, but there is a mission, like there is a training element to it where it's the only times where the senior leadership actually gets to move the chess pieces around, like if they were actually deploying the entire regiment at once. Which would be an extraordinary circumstance. I mean, we're talking like aliens have landed that they need all.
Or Panama in 1989.
Yeah. Well, that's true. There have been chances. I would say, there are times where all 3 battalions are needed, and there are times where all 3 battalions really just want their jump wings.
Right.
So
yes, sir.
But that being said, this is the one time the senior. It's a rare event. It's going to be exceptional. It's the one time the senior leadership gets to do, usually in their entire tenure in command, because of they might do 2, get these 2 opportunities to practice, moving all the battalions at once, and so, but the rest of the time, other than bringing them all to, it's almost always at Fort Benning. Having them do a big regimental wide jump in a coordinated manner to get all those Rangers on target at around the same time. Other than that, there's group PT. There's
competitions.
There's
there are all kinds of competitions.
Yeah. I ran the 10K.
Oh, did you?
Sure did. That was my thing.
Really? That I don't remember them having a 10K when I was there, but they may have, and I just didn't know it. I was in the sniper competition. Actually, got done shooting my lane, stood up, backed up, bumped into some civilian. It's like, what the fuck's this guy doing here? Kind of do a double take, and it's Robert De Niro.
What?
Yeah. He was his nephew was somebody he was related to or something, was involved in the State Department and was advising on Ronin and was aware of the Ranger Rendezvous, so invited him out, and he came out like when they were doing the jump and assemble exercise, competition. He was like kind of standing with the commanders.
Really?
So, yeah, somebody runs by and go, "Hey, look, it's Al Pacino," and he's like, "Fuck you." Our whole sniper team got a picture with him. So,
oh, that's funny! Wow.
Yeah. That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
People can go, right? I mean, if you're in, is it only
to the jump?
Guests? Yeah. I mean, if you're in the area when they have a Ranger Rendezvous, if you can check it out, it's worth checking out because like you say, it's Burning Man for Rangers.
Ian, do you have any crazy stories from either Rendezvous or like what when they did like company field games?
Oh, I've got the craziest story of all. So this is we do jumps at SOCM, which is great because we're maintaining proficiency. We're getting that jump pay, $150 a month. That's where my beer budget's coming from, and we're getting to jump out of the little casas at Bragg, and it says crazy jumps where like, hey, if you land on the runway, make sure you get off because the aircraft's coming back down to land right away. I was like, and it's so like casual because it's
It's SF guys.
Yeah, it's SF. It's run by the SF cadre, and they're like, static line, please. Static line. They just can't be bothered, and it's jovial. The gut truck's out there. Who cares? It's fun. This is my first jump actually at Ranger Battalion, other than the one we did at RASP. And I managed to be first in the stick somehow. So like in the second pass. So everybody goes out and then I line up. It's my first time jumping the door. I'm so stoked on it. I've always wanted to jump the door. I've heard you get these great exits.
And it's a ramp blast on the Casa.
No. This is sorry. This is a C-130.
Gotcha.
This is at Rendezvous. So that's then at Stockholm. That's the great chill jumps. Now I'm in Ranger World at Benning. We go out to a C-130. It's 120 degrees on the tarmac. Guys are throwing up. Like we're all sitting on the floor of the aircraft, waiting for 30 minutes to be able to take off. Guys are throwing up, heat stroking out in the aircraft, and we all just can't wait to get out. But I'm gonna get my first door jump, and I'm so stoked on it. I jump, and I have the best exit ever, and I look down, and I see at the Friar drop zone they've built a little mound for the DZSO to park their car on to look out and see if there's any injured jumpers out there. And it's pretty high winds that day. If there weren't congressmen in the stands and stuff like that, it probably would have been crazy. And so I have really high lateral movement, and I pull my slip right as I'm coming in, and I slide into that hill and break my hip.
Oh my God.
And require a emergency surgery later that day to repair it, and with plates and screws. And the first person to run up and check me out is my boss's boss, Master Sergeant Montgomery, the Ranger medic, the one who literally wrote the book. He's like, "You're one of mine, aren't you? Well, get up." And it was like, oh, I can't bear weight on my leg. This is not good. And I'm like in a panic because I'm thinking, oh my, I can't run off the drop zone. Like people are gonna kill me. Like some Ranger NCO is gonna come and like just eat me.
I'm embarrassing them.
Yeah, I'm embarrassing. I'm ashamed to my country and my unit, and like. But anyways, I get pulled put in the vehicle. I get a fentanyl lollipop, so that's pretty sweet. Which is good because then I knew it's good that I think it's good as a medic to like have a taste of your own medicine, like just so you know what the other what to expect when you give it to other people. But I get on to out of surgery and have this recovery period, and thankfully, because Rangers get such a high level quality of care, and we had like 3 staff physical therapists and a strength coach, by the time it came around to do our qualifications for the next deployment and at the end of the next training cycle, and the training cycle is brutally short, only 6 months, and normally the recovery would be like a year. But I was ready to go and pass the PT tests within like 4 months.
Holy shit! So they shot you right out the door after breaking your hip.
Oh, that's amazing.
God, I love Ranger Battalion. They don't give a fuck.
So that's the Ranger. That's the most Ranger story to ever Ranger.
Yeah, no, it is.
I mean, that's another way that Ranger Battalion really changed over the years. Really became more professionalized, because the idea of having like, a physical therapist, or basically having resources that professional sports teams have. And I know that Delta really, really sort of set that standard back in the day.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it used to be like, hey, here's some vitamin M, deal with it, or you're out. And there were no real resources available. It also shows in the builds, the actual physical build of Rangers pre 9/11 and Rangers post 9/11. We were skinny. I mean, we were like all just super skinny, because it was all about runs and road marches, and few people went to the gym just because you went on these long runs or long road marches every morning, and and trying to build mass just was tough. I mean, there were guys who did it, but it wasn't common. But now Rangers are generally pretty jacked. I mean, built for the job. Everybody's built for the job. What was PT like for you, Jack, and for you, Ian? Like, were you guys still doing a lot of the runs and a lot of the road marches, or had it moved to a more kind of dynamically focused,
Well, I mean, in my time, it was probably very similar to yours, Dave. We did ruck marches every Thursday. Pretty much every day we were going on runs, and I think that you also have to understand that it's the Army. So, like, yes, we had a gym and we had great equipment in there, but it's still kind of a fairly small gym. It is not big enough for a battalion. Yeah. So Army PT is designed around the idea that you're going to PT a platoon, a company, a battalion. And that's why so much of it is focused on like running and push-ups and pull-ups. It's like things you can do en masse.
Right.
It's not that sort of like focused on the individual, like we're going to Gold's Gym and you're going to do these curls and you're going to do these squats in the rack and stuff like that, because you don't have that equipment for every single private in the unit. Now, I'll let Ian answer, but it sounds like to a large extent, there's been some positive change there as far as strength training and things like that.
So I did PT in a platoon level once when I was at Ranger Battalion. The rest of the time it was like the med section was doing their own thing, or it was like my team. Like
we usually did squad level PT, but if you went to the gym, it was all like senior NCOs in there.
Oh no, it was like by the time I got there, it was like the CrossFit bug had hit hard. Mm-hmm. It was all CrossFit was old by then. It was like that was outdated. There was onto I think Mountain Fitness or something like that. It's basically more weight and generally more leg focused. All about building. Like it's all about being on the squat rack. Clean and jerk, just deadlifts, all about building that posterior chain and getting those muscles that would like get you up and down Tucker Gar and ready to rip the head off a guy on target or something like that. Like that was the mindset had very much shifted, and I don't other than periodically, like a team leader having you do the Ranger school fitness test to make sure that you were ready to go if slot opened up or the timing worked out. It was basically always like we're going to be weightlifting, we're going to be doing something. And then for medics, it's slightly different too, because sick call hours are during pretty close to normal PT hours. So it's like, you've got like 20-30 minutes to go work out, and then you need to be in your duty uniform over in the clinic to take care of Rangers, and then you're going to go work out like usually on your lunch break or something like that. So it's a little bit different schedule.
Did you guys do a lot of combat focused PT when you were in?
Yeah, I would say it was a lot of kit kind of gear. Doing the we'd started to implement that Ranger fitness assessment, doing like you have a portion where you're doing like sled drags and doing rope climb,
the RPAT.
Yeah, the RPAT. And that was kind of a newer thing. But really, I would say it was like that CrossFit Plus was like the core of it. There was this one point where everybody had those 5-finger shoes everywhere, and like they had to ban it. But like, going to what you were saying, Jack, about not having equipment, we had 2 gyms in the battalion area.
Wow.
In the 1st battalion area, like in our compound on Hunter, and it was between the like as long as not everybody was trying to same score, was like, hey, we're all doing leg days the same day. You could just about everybody could be doing some kind of weightlifting thing, and then shifting around, doing a little bit of mobility training, agility. But there was a formal program as well that they were supposed to follow. Start to get away from just team leaders just seeing how much they could like pull out the privates to really like, hey, there's a program you should be following to get your guys as strong as possible. Yeah. So that was a thing I benefited from as well.
No, that's really cool to hear. I was definitely one of those like old school team leaders who I would run the privates 5 miles every day, and they hated me for it. And, yeah.
Oh man, I was a great runner, so I was all about the running.
We also did not have the like you said, we did not have all of that like access to gym equipment for every private in the regiment at that time, so it wasn't necessarily an option either. But okay, Ian, we heard all of your boasting about how you're this badass combat medic and like you can lift 500 pounds and all this awesome stuff. Okay, cool, man. Talk to us about your initial deployment. Walk us through how you got called up for that, where you were going, train up for it, and then shooting overseas.
Real quick, let's. We got a couple questions I want to get to before we start this next segment.
Okay.
Excuse me, Alex. Thank you very much. In your own words, what is the job of an Army Ranger for the uninitiated? What was it like being an Asian American Army Ranger and one of the few in SOF?
That's a great question. So the Army Ranger, I would say the role of an Army Ranger outside of the doctrinal, there's a doctrinal term, like kind of terminology about being the Special Operations Raid Force, but it's there's this point where you have guys, there's a cost effectiveness curve where you get these super expensive special mission unit guys that you've poured a ton of resources into, and you give missions to them, but like really high priority national level missions to them. But you want to think about like, if there's a lot of risk associated with that mission, is it worth losing these, like potentially losing a few of these very expensive, highly trained guys? And then there's, it kind of comes down from that to like the special forces guys, and then Rangers are like the lowest barrier, like the most cost effective in the special operations world to use and utilize for missions. And so there's 2 sets of missions that they get. They get either missions that just require a lot of brute force, or missions that are very high risk. And so because of that, it is a really great place to learn how to be a medic, because there's going to be a lot of exposure to injuries, blasts, gunshot wounds, and just the standard orthopedic injuries like what I had.
And Delta Force is also like, they're like the Gucci JSOC unit, that does all that specialized shit you were talking about. Like Rangers and Special Forces are like the long haul sustainable unit that can be out there kicking ass every day, in different ways, different missions. But I mean, Ranger Battalion is like the sledgehammer. Like they can do some stuff that, JSOC guys just, they're not trained and equipped, and it's not their mission to do that stuff.
Yeah. Like going out on and doing these random house raid targets where 1 out of every 10 might just be an entire house rigged to blow. Like that's not an effective use of a tier 1 operator. That's what
they would probably pass on that target.
Frankly. Oh yeah, they almost certainly would. But that's also that volume of raids and missions goes to the Rangers, and the Rangers get those missions. And that's what the Rangers specialize. They do it, and they do it a little bit cheaper. And they do it by being focused really on those key fundamentals around marksmanship, medical care, mobility, and just like generally mastering these basics of military fundamentals. So they do it, and like Dave was saying earlier, they do it just a little bit faster a little bit harder than what you might see in a normal like a high speed platoon from 82nd or 173rd.
They also, I mean, I know when I was in, I think there were more SEALs and more SF than there were Rangers. But Rangers are trained to work in larger units, so you have your own supporting fires, you have your own external security, you have your own, your own assault force. Where
Rangers can scale. Rangers can, that's a great point.
Where special forces and SEALs, they need external actors, somebody else to come in and provide that for them.
Yeah. God forbid SEALs ever see a belt-fed weapon or an indirect mortar system.
This is spinning. This is some hot takes.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm like 4 beers in, so it's coming out. It's coming out of me, man. There's no holding back.
This is some white phosphorus takes.
They have belt-fed weapons. They just don't understand that a belt is not a single round.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry. Sorry, Jeff. Anyway. Okay. And then the second question, what was it like being an Asian American Ranger and one of the few in SOF?
So really an interesting phenomenon is that when, at least in 1st Battalion, when I was there, very few, there were definitely a few Asians out in the line companies, but almost all the Asians were in the med section. So we had there was 2 senior medics, there was 6, so it's it was, you get to the point where you'd be kind of walking across the compound and some random first sergeant or platoon sergeant that didn't actually know you would just kind of look at you and be like, hey Ranger, you a medic? Yes, for sergeant. It's a fairly safe guess. It is kind of strange being Asian is kind of a this weird place to be in the special operations community, because some people will be some people who have really problematic viewpoints will be like, oh, you're one of the good ones, and bring you in and then be like, you're not like all those guys in the support company. You know which ones I'm talking about, and really just feel comfortable sharing all that stuff with you, thinking that they can use you to validate their really kind of disgusting viewpoints about people of other races. So definitely it was an eye-opening experience, being an Asian American in the Ranger Battalion. I'm glad I had it though. A lot of ways it was surprising. I was surprised at a lot of, I grew up in California. I was a college grad. I was the epitome of a coastal liberal going into the Army, and I had a lot of preconceived notions about what people from the South and the Midwest would think about me or others, and a lot of those did not bear out as well. That being said, there's always those individuals who will
was that common, where people would pick you as an ally in their racism like that? I mean, was that?
Yeah, I think they would. It wasn't common, but when it happened, it's one of those things where it's so weird. Where if it happens more than once, it's like, is this a thing that happens? And it definitely happened more than once. There's 3 or 4 times where somebody pretty senior, like platoon sergeant or higher, would kind of bring me in. It's like, hey dog, and they'd feel like they had some grievance that they needed to air, and that I was an appropriate individual.
You would get it.
Yeah, that I would get it.
This is one of those things that you learn in college. Really, is that there are different types of racism. There's that, the Ku Klux Klan type of racism we all understand, but then there's the other type of it's okay. We're okay with you as a Black person or an Asian person as long as you're propping up the existing system as it is and don't want any kind of change. And that's part of the conversation we're having as a country right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, would you say what was sort of the what were sort of the racial atmospherics at battalion in general when you were there? Would you say that,
Dave, you're going in with a knife right now. You're going in there.
I'm very curious because, and obviously it's, because I wasn't exposed to it, but what I saw, at least like at my platoon level, was there was definitely some guys that were racist, not like KKK racist, but like casual racist.
Mhm.
But they would openly act that out with like Black Rangers in a way that I don't know. It wasn't like hostile, but was like almost making fun of themselves and the situation at the same time. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that was just my perception of it.
One of the things about the Rangers is that it's a much younger special operations unit, and so there's always new, like the culture more accurately, I think, reflects like young America than maybe other special operations units, right? Because you have 18, 19-year-olds. I had platoon sergeants that were in their early 20s, like 22, like I had a 23-year-old platoon sergeant at one point. Like these are like very, very young guys, and so a lot of times, and now girls, and the attitudes that they brought with them for the most part were not as kind of old school as I was maybe expecting. So usually when there was that kind of, there'd be the jokes that like any 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old might would make, because they're testing. That's what 18, 19-year-old and 20-year-olds do. They test boundaries and try and push things until, especially when they're in a military and masculine environment, they're gonna push things until they like somebody like swats them down.
Yeah.
But there was, for the most part, I found that when I had a concern that maybe like somebody's NCO like evaluation report or something might reflect somebody's internal feelings about their race, it was usually somebody who'd been there who's from a little bit older generation, and
Really,
because they were more senior as well. So I think the culture changes a little bit faster in Ranger Battalion because of that.
Yeah.
And I found my experience was, again, uniformly positive, but that for some reason, I don't know, I attracted the attention of like problematic individuals and found myself, or individuals with problematic viewpoints, and found myself interacting with them a little bit more regularly than I would have preferred. It's also like, if I go to Benning for training, and Benning's under Sharia law and you can't buy alcohol on Sundays, so I had to drive over to Alabama. If I went to the wrong gas station, I definitely would encounter, really like just blatant outright, like everything short of a hood over their head racism. Like you should not be here after dark. Like, get at it. Like, fill up your tank and get out of here. That kind of stuff.
Wow.
But, and in many places in certain parts of Georgia and parts of the Deep South, that is something that I experienced, and I'm sure it was kind of strange to me, because I think a lot of times people just didn't know what to do with me. A lot of times I was in communities where they just hadn't seen an Asian person before, and I can't imagine. I'd be curious what the perspective from like a Black Ranger would be, as I'm sure their experience might be pretty significantly different from my own.
Yeah, and I'd be curious to know what their perspective was from earlier generations and then the later generations. And what you said about sort of the millennials, or the age of Rangers, is sometimes it's easy to bag on millennials, but we also have to remember that millennials have been fighting the bulk of the war. So while it's easy to focus on a certain fragment of the millennial generation, as the social justice warriors or leftists or whatever, we also have to remember that they've been bearing this burden. That same generation has been, for the last 20 years.
They're also a lot cooler, I think, overall. As far as like, the LGBT issues, the racial issues, like that generation, they don't really give a fuck. They're like, oh, whatever,
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I think we were First Battalion actually had one of the first just openly was I am gay.
That must have gone over like a lead balloon. And
I mean, like all the it was funny. It's like because you're a medic, you get I'm sitting in close to like the head shops a lot of the times, and so I'm overhearing like what platoon leaders and these even up in the like S3, and they're like, how will we manage this? And like all the line guys, they don't care, they don't give a shit.
Yeah, they don't give a fuck.
There's like, because there's been guys that they knew like in the cough that was like, yeah, that guy obviously is gay.
Yeah.
Like, he just didn't say anything. But I just thought it was funny because it was a mortarman, and like mortars in Ranger Bat is like that's like one of the scariest places to be just as a human. And those guys. I remember I was assigned during during that first training cycle when I was kind of recovering and I couldn't like move around that well. They're like, hey, go watch the mortars during the our airfield seizure and MLAT practice, and just like making sure, like just watching like how they would just get the shit smoked out of them in between.
Yep. On target
for fire. Yeah, like on target, like just like, and I think they said it was like that overseas, like they'd be like in country getting like just like getting smoked while on mission. Like
that's crazy. And fast roping or moving to target with those base plates.
Oh yeah.
Unreal. We a couple more questions. Brendan, thank you very much. Hi from Australia. As a medic in Ranger Battalion or later in your career, what is the best medical first aid save you had? Don't want to know about the bad stories. What about the good ones?
Good story. I have two really good stories. One is one of our dogs, our canine, our military working dogs, actually was recovering from surgery and had a really bad reaction to some medication, and that was probably one of the most complicated patient issue, like emergency, like medical situations that I've dealt with, just because like we get basic information about how to treat canine patients, but that I always think about that one because I was like, there's so many complex factors. I have to take everything I know and I have to take it to another type of creature, and then I take my job seriously, and all the like in our rangers, like our military working dogs are rangers with us. Like we take care of them, we evacuate them on target if they're injured. Like we take it pretty seriously, and so that was a situation where there was like finding the right dosage of the medication to manage the reaction, and then keeping them hydrated, getting the IV stick, and all that was probably the like one of the more complicated things that I had to do. There was another incident with so one of the things, and I'm not sure Jack or Dave, we have started working in much more of a FID, a foreign internal defense kind of role in certain countries and aspects, where we were working with local partner units, and one of the members of a local partner unit had a combination of a injury that affected the respiratory tract and a high probability that they also had tuberculosis.
Oh wow.
And so having to treat the respiratory injury. In this case, it was a broken, multiple broken ribs, which is known as a flail segment. It's a really bad situation. It looks like the whole rib cage is kind of a section of the rib cage is kind of popping in and out of their chest, and so stabilizing that while putting on all this like protective equipment, using like everything that I could find to keep myself and the other medic that I was working with safe. I would say that was another really kind of complicated moment, but where it turned out well. And this is like the individual fully recovered and ended up being out on target later in the next year with another battalion. I ended up hearing about this individual's recovery. So,
how long does something like that take to heal when with a couple of like broken ribs like that where they've got that going on?
I mean, every broken bone, if it can be splinted, it's gonna be like 6 weeks. Something like that is gonna be longer. It could be like a few months, and then there's you have to do cardio recovery after that too, because you're not getting the full inhalation. Your diaphragm's not moving up and down like it normally would. You have to take light breaths for an extended period of time, and then your diaphragm gets used to only taking light breaths. So there was a lot of physical therapy involved there. Unfortunately, this individual was in a country where there was a lot of NATO medical resources available to them to help recover. This is also an individual that worked for a very high tier local unit, so the equivalent of like a special mission unit in that country.
Andrew, thank you very much. What is the dumbest thing you saw someone do in the military? I'm asking for funny stories.
The dumbest thing I saw someone do in the military is not when a individual lost their sidearm on target. It was when the strike force re-infilled into a hot LZ in order to search for and retrieve this said lost sidearm. So that was that. I mean, I'm just thinking about potential loss of the aircraft, the individuals, like the math. Just that was like just an extraordinarily dumb decision that fortunately turned out fine. Again, the ranger works at night, and night can cover up some mistakes and make you pay for a lot of others. So this was a situation that's probably the dumbest thing I've seen in the military. I'm sure, Dave, you probably have some stories too.
I've seen some dumb things, but in terms of were there ever any like funny things like that happened that like either in an operation that almost stops the flow of an operation or like distracts people because it's so funny, or even things just back at battalion?
So right before, so the way Ranger deployments works, you get back, you spend a little bit of time getting kind of just briefly reacclimated, and then you go on a 2-week block leave. The day before you get released from that 2-week block leave is just chaos in the company operating facilities. Our little kind of this combination warehouse, locker room, office that we work out of, we call it the COF for short. Things get real dumb there right before we go on block leave. And so probably the dumbest thing I saw was individuals had pulled a taser out of the arms room and were shooting it at each other. And one person got tased and fell back and split their head open, and so I had to evaluate this individual for a head injury, staple their head shut because they had a big like gash laceration on the back of their head, and like continue to monitor and make sure that they were safe, had scheduled regular check-ins over the next few hours to make sure like that they didn't have signs of a head injury as they go out on leave. And we were all kind of trying to keep this hush hush from the chain of command so that everybody didn't get their like leave pulled. And so this was like, it was like guys, there's one day where we just need to just not be dumb. And sometimes being a medic for the Rangers, it feels like you're taking care of lemmings. Like,
it's nice to know that with all the changes we've talked about Ranger Battalion going through, it really hasn't changed.
No.
Some things never change. That's true. I'm sure you, Dave and Jack, I'm sure you guys have similar stories of some shenanigans.
I mean, as a hard hat diver and a ranger and guys do dumb shit. I mean,
It's like how much time have you got? How much time have you got for this stream?
Exactly.
We had some like mischief nights where we went into where the legs live and fired off the fire extinguishers and got chased around by CQ, and we stole the regimental commander's distinguished unit insignia flag off of his front porch. Made off with that. We had like a handle of vodka and we were all taking turns swigging off of it. The stories just go on and on and on. I remember I got drunk at a friend's house on Fort Benning and went for a very long walk, ended up jumping over a fence, and I passed out at a gas station outside the front gate at Fort Benning. And CQ came and picked me up. The ridiculous stories just go on and on.
Yeah. JK, thank you. Ian, guest medic. What year were you discharged?
2014.
2014. Hammer and Nails, great show as always. Thank you very much. Brad, biggest difference in guys who went into special mission units. And I don't know if he is including the Rangers into that or not, but maybe from your experience in the soft community, is there a difference between like regular soldiers, regular civilians, and guys who go into SOF and then guys who go into higher tier units after that? After like something like Rangers?
I could say the guys that, so first off, I think just about everybody I knew that went on and did that was at least a squad leader, had done their squad leader time. So back up really quick. When you're a Ranger, there's like this. You're a private, then you do your private time, then you get to go to school. Then after you come to school, when you just try not to fuck up, and then you get a team leader slot. You do your team leader time, and then you get other options. You can go to the sniper section. You can go to K9s. You can get technical training in some of these other kind of cool whiz-bang specialties that we have now. And then eventually you get to, you go on and you get a squad, and you have that time. So the guys I knew, they showed a lot of maturity often for their age. The guys that did it and were successful at the caveat, they were guys that, like, it never surprised me that somebody had gone on to a special mission unit. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that, like, this guy is like, they were somebody who had focused on the fundamentals, like all good Rangers do, and had just totally mastered that, and then continued to master it. And then they were like, I want to do, like, I want a little bit more to master. And then they went on. They were usually more thoughtful, more mature. They weren't the ones that you ever thought were gonna like have like necessarily like a crazy night out downtown or something like that. Again, that was my experience. I'm sure there are people like that that are
sure.
that live a little bit more wild lifestyle that are successful, but the guys that I saw were doing that. I will say, if I had stayed in Ranger Battalion, coming back from school, and getting that senior medic role, the next thing to look at after that is in a Ranger medic world is like, do you want to start looking at going and supporting the recce unit for a bit? or going to the Rangers have their own recce unit at the regimental level, which is a pretty special unit, and they get some pretty interesting missions, and so that was something that I thought was really appealing to me if I had been able to stay in, because I love being a Ranger. It was I think if I could have found a way to continue doing that and continue finding that new challenge, that's probably what I would have looked to do as well.
Now, when you say going to school, you mean going to Ranger school,
Correct.
right? And while you were there, about how long would somebody spend either on the line or in their whatever their base element was before they would go to Ranger school?
I think for the line infantry guys, it was usually they needed like 2 training cycles and 1 deployment around or so. For the medics, it was kind of a weird thing. It was like by the time we finished SOCM and got into battalion, our contracts, if we were only 4 years, were pretty short. Yeah. So it was like you do a training cycle, a deployment, and then it's either re-enlist and go to Ranger school, or don't bother, just go through the next training cycle, deploy, and then you're have a good life. And so I actually decided to take the route where I re-enlisted and went to Ranger school. And unfortunately, I didn't know it, but I had my femur had refractured, and so I got back and just needed multiple surgeries at that point, and was just completely destroyed after Ranger school. Yeah. So that was not it ended up unfortunately being pretty much the end of my military career, but it also triggered getting to come to New York, my humanitarian career, and now the current work I do in public health.
So I want to get into all of that. But I do, before we finish out the Ranger Battalion portion, I wanted to get into, your jocking up to deploy and getting overseas and all of that. If you could tell us a little bit about, rolling out on that deployment.
Sure. So as a medic, you kind of do this matchmaking with the platoons, and they, sometimes they'll pair a medic with a platoon. The platoon will be like, who's this guy? This guy's weird. We don't like this guy. And we'll take him and try and put him in another platoon and put a different guy there. So I got match made with this platoon in Charlie Company, and it ended up being a really good match. Worked with a great platoon sergeant who was actually formerly worked at 275. And then we were out in southern Afghanistan, in an area where there were just a lot of kind of, at that time, a lot of pressure plate IEDs, a lot of like everywhere you were walking was just there were just no shortage of explosives or devices, and so there was always this desire to have 2 or even 3 medics on target. So I got to work with great couple of medics out of the strike force, and it was one of the there was actually two strike forces working together, so we got kind of double the training, double the missions, and double the opportunities to go out on target. So that was it was like kind of a dream first deployment, because that was 2012, so things were not at their it was like a definitely not a peak deployment, but we were right on the beginning of the fighting season that happens in Afghanistan, and so we ended up being actually so successful that there was actually not a really good fighting season in that area, because we successfully kind of interrupted the supply in that region. So that was kind of cool. Also, The base was full of British, and they have been doing more so much longer than we have, and they're just so much better at it. They built a steakhouse on their base. It was just like, it's great. Like as a medic, I had I had my own little Land Rover, so I'd pile up a bunch of the privates in, and we'd go touring around after we got back in the mornings, and it was pretty fun. Like we'd do some sun tanning out in the satellite towers and things like that, and go out on missions at night and back in time for breakfast burritos. There's worse ways to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of mainly all night missions, all working with special operations aviation or just frankly some really competent regular Army and even National Guard aviation. In National Guard aviation, actually, in the Army, oftentimes gets just as much, if not more, training than regular Army, because they in certain parts of the country they end up doing a lot of those rescue missions for like stranded hikers and things like that. So sometimes they're really good at like hoists and these things that maybe regular Army units might not practice quite as often. So it was really great to be able to work with these different organizations and different tiers, and just be able to be out there with the various units that make up the strike forces out there. So
like this was the shit for you at this point. I mean, after all this training you'd been through, like this was it. This was the heat.
Yeah, and plus it was even more emotional for me because I had this major life-altering injury, and then I managed to recover and then go out and target. I mean, I remember I went on my first mission was on one of the MH-47s, and it's like the ramp is down while they're flying, and then when they come into land they put it up because they want to be able to pitch back and do as they're coming in. And so the ramp comes up, and then when they're finally touched down, then they'll lower it and land. And I was so amped up. I had no idea what a Ranger mission was like in real life. I just figured as soon as that ramp dropped, it was going to be like the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, and like rounds will go rip through, and like everybody, it was just like, I think somebody shot off a flare, and like some farmer shot a shotgun, but it was like actually at like at his like neighbor or something like that, and not at us. It was just there was like nobody fired a shot. It was a completely successful mission. We got our target, but it was
in your mind it was D-Day.
But like I was thinking like it could be,
Sure.
I'm just thinking like, what if it's a mass casualty event, and like thinking through all these scenarios, and the pinnacle of my training. And that was like my first, but we got jackpot on our first mission, and that was pretty cool too. So, and
what's it like being a Ranger medic on target? If you could describe, I mean, maybe there's like some OPSEC considerations, but I mean, if you could walk us through, like as opposed to like an assaulter blowing down the door and going into the room.
Yeah.
What's it like for you? Or you're trailing along with the platoon sergeant, and like you're on call, if something happens.
Yeah, so definitely not. Especially when assaulting a compound, there'll be a breach point where the assault force is going to enter. Sometimes there's multiple. Definitely not going to be at the breach, but need to be nearby, because if there's going to be injuries, that's where they're most likely to occur. And so, but at the same time, once you kind of made it through that breach point, you get to transition to, I'd be right on the platoon sergeant's shoulder. So I'd be, I'd be doing room clearing with the platoon sergeant sometimes, and like kind of like peeking in and around, and we'd be the first people into a couple of the rooms outside of like the main target compound. And so that would be a really it was a really interesting and cool experience to be able to be like right there with this like Ranger platoon sergeant who's been doing this for a minimum of like 8-9 years out on missions. I think it's more like five or six, but still like and like seeing them work, seeing how they move, and kind of, because there really is an art to close quarters that's difficult to teach. I think probably the Special Forces probably has the closest to a school that really can teach that level of knowledge, but it's not really, there's no real replacement for experience and seeing somebody who's just done it in Iraq and Afghanistan and done it for year after year after year, multiple times a year. Being able to be right on their shoulder and be the second guy in the stack was very cool.
At this point, a lot of Rangers, I don't know what their retention was like, but a lot of Rangers had a lot of combat experience, or at least a trip or two or whatever. How would they integrate the people who didn't have any? Would they treat you any differently? And maybe you saw this for the line guys too, but did they trust you right there with them? Did they? How did they react? How did they handhold you, or what did they do?
There wasn't a lot of, and I don't know if this was maybe that I was fortunate to have a great team leader that squared me away, so that when I was working with these, either the platoon sergeant, so medics, either there are two real positions a medic will be with, either with the platoon sergeant or with the weapons squad leader. And the weapons squad leader will be a little bit off, so they can use those big, belt-fed weapon systems to get them set up to utilize them if needed, to either keep people from exiting the target, or to keep enemy reinforcements from coming to the target. So we would those two kind of positions. And I had a senior medic who was like, "No, you should be up here. You should get your time in with the platoon sergeant, and I'll sit back on this role because you need to learn this." And they had worked with me to make it apparent that I was competent and I was smart, and that I could learn and not be a hindrance. And so I had a great experience with watching them work to do the initial clearance, and then to do the searching and doing the tactical site exploitation, where we would look for intelligence on target, and even the tactical questioning that would happen on target. I'd be usually, again, behind the shoulder, like listening in, seeing what they're listening, what kinds of questions they're asking, and in order to try and figure out is this the individual that we're looking for, what other individuals might be in this compound, and so on.
That's interesting.
So Ian, maybe we'll get into like some more like deployment stories when we do the bonus segment, but we've already kept you quite a while, and I want to catch up on some of the other subjects I definitely want to touch upon. You talked about how you had to be medically discharged because of your injury after Ranger school. How did you get involved in doing humanitarian work then after your military service? Maybe tell us about that. Your medical discharge as you see fit, and how you felt about that. But then going into Nepal after that horrible earthquake killed 9,000 people.
Yeah, it was, there was actually two, and I'll just say really quickly. I should probably be wrapping up in the next 10 minutes or so, but yeah. I'll try and briefly get to it. But really, I came to New York. I wanted to go to grad school. I figured that was the next step. I wanted to be doing something in healthcare. So I started looking at health policy and humanitarian assistance. I figured that was a natural transition for somebody who'd been a Ranger medic. And I got this great opportunity in between my first and second year of grad school to work with a humanitarian organization called NYC Medics that deployed to Nepal, to one of the nearby, not the most affected districts, but one of the ones right next to it. And there, I was essentially doing very similar stuff. We set up a clinical site. I was doing primary care, emergency care, and then because of the site we were at was in the Himalayan foothills, and vehicle-based evacuations were not really an option, a lot of what I did was also coordinating rotary wing evacs, kind of assessing patients, making sure that they were good and prepped for transport, sometimes riding with them as necessary, in order to make sure that they got to the next higher level of care as needed. So it was really great being able to use that skill set that the U.S. Army and Special Operations Command had invested in me to help the people who've been affected by this natural disaster. And then after I finished grad school and got my degree in public health, I went on and did some similar work in Haiti as well after the hurricane in 2016. And there was more of a food crisis issue where there'd been a lot of crop destruction. And so what we were trying to think about was identify, a lot of it was identifying airfields that could accept large shipments, doing airfield assessments, doing some helicopter movements, but that's a really inefficient way. So a lot of it was just kind of assessing roads and then working with a logistics cluster to identify just how can we keep those lines, those logistical chains open to these communities that have been so devastated and lost, all their crops and had been sometimes weeks without real food. And so that it was very similar to the kind of thinking you have to have in the military about how do you keep a forward deployed unit sustained, what are the challenges there, and how to overcome each individual challenge between getting the supply from here to there. So that was again a great way to utilize that skill set. And
it's almost like they needed somebody who had that type of training in the military to do this stuff, because I mean, how does a civilian develop those skills except with years and years of experience?
Yeah, and it's, I sat in on these UN logistics cluster meetings to coordinate with them, and it was amazing how just about everybody in there was former French military, former UK military, former Belgian military, like every, they would always make the joke, we're just the truck drivers, but there really are the lifeblood in a humanitarian setting of getting things to people when there is no functioning market that they can buy it from.
So then talk to us a little bit about how after that you got involved in your current position working public health policy and how that came about, I suppose out of graduate school.
So it turns out a humanitarian lifestyle is not very sustainable. Does not pay well. It's really hard to make rent. And I was like, I want to do something in healthcare. I would like to do something where I can utilize data analysis and some of these leadership skills and analytical skills I've developed over time. And so I ended up in this healthcare consulting field where most of the work I do is around analysis of non-infectious diseases like cancer and diabetes, but increasingly now there's some interest in infectious diseases, and of course in the current environment, vaccine preventable and infectious diseases are pretty much top of mind. So thinking about how a new medication or device or medical procedure might be effective in different health systems, whether that's a nationalized system like the UK or a system like what you see in China, where it's kind of a less developed nationalized system with a lot of kind of regional difference in the different provinces, or a system like the US, which is this really complicated mixed match of both, depending on if you're a veteran or a Native American or older or poor, there's a different health system that you're in. And so thinking about, is it effective and is it cost effective? So that's a lot of what I do now, and thinking about the numbers and being a numbers guy in the bean counters and analyzing what risk there is and what the benefits are of a given medical intervention.
And being at ground zero, which I mean, New York City is, for the coronavirus in so many ways, in Brooklyn, and I haven't even kept track. I think I lost track around over, a little while ago as far as how many deaths just Brooklyn had.
Yeah.
What are your observations about how New York City has grappled with this issue, and what are some of the lessons learned?
Yeah, that complexity of different systems is a major vulnerability of the U.S. health system. It leaves a lot of places where people can fall through the cracks if they're old but not old enough to qualify for Medicare, if they're poor but not poor enough to qualify for Medicaid, if they're a veteran but they're not totally into the VA system because they're at that lower tier of care and they have to prove that they have an economic need. There's so many ways that people can not get the healthcare that they might require, and especially in a scenario like this where days matter in terms of getting a test and getting diagnosed and getting treated, and getting into isolation so that you don't infect anybody else. It's a really complicated thing, and it would have been difficult and probably would have not been good it would have not been a great response no matter what. But I definitely think that from the city leadership to the state leadership to at the federal level, that there were some missed opportunities to coordinate better, to find solutions, to leadership has to start at the top. If there's anything I learned in Ranger Battalion in the regiment, is that like the culture and the attitudes are come from the top. And if it's attitude of kind of everybody's on their own, then that coordination that's necessary to get people to care for people in a pandemic type situation is just not going to happen at the level that it needs to. And the response to a pandemic has to be coordinated at so many levels because of that complexity of the U.S. health system.
I'm not asking this from a political perspective. I'm asking this from like a numbers and a healthcare perspective, and the fact that you've had this opportunity to see how other systems work and things like that. Do you feel as though some sort of socialized medicine, or I don't even want to use the word socialized because it's so politicized, but but universal healthcare is a beneficial policy, is a manageable policy, is an economical policy? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think some version of that is what we need. Whether or not we can get there politically is a different question. I think there would be a lot of benefit from moving towards something along those lines. And there are so many different versions. There's employer-based systems like in Japan and Germany, where there's still most people get their health insurance from their employer. But if you lose your job, or if it's a small employer, there's another national system that you're automatically enrolled in. There's no transition period. There's no, oh, you have to call somebody, you have to sign up, you have to get your card, you have to pay money. No, it's like the day that you lose this care, like you can still go and get health care. You don't have to worry about potentially getting a financially catastrophic bill. There's fully nationalized systems like in the UK, where the doctors are government employees, the clinics are government facilities. That's more like kind of like what the VA system works like in the Indian Health Service works like in the United States. And then there's also single insurer options like in France and Canada, where there's a single, basically the government acts just as the insurance provider and sets a lot of regulations, and then all the hospitals are still able to fulfill that provision of care however they think is most economic and suitable for their population. But there's still stringent standards around that. And in many ways we have each of these systems in the US. The difference is we have all of them.
Right.
And we have all of them, and we have lots of ways where you can get lost in the cracks.
Right.
Because like I said, there's those age-based cracks, there's those income-based cracks, and there's those demographic-based cracks. Like, are you a veteran? Are you a Native American? Are you, are you disabled? Are you a low-income child? Those are all covered groups. But to be covered is also a question too in the US, because it doesn't necessarily mean, just because something's covered doesn't necessarily mean you're still not going to get a financially catastrophic bill.
Right. and we also sort of have those bureaucracy-based cracks where we're like, if you look at the VA, even veterans who are eligible for care aren't getting it because they're fighting this vast bureaucracy a lot of times.
And some ways, the way other countries get around that problem is they just say everybody's eligible. And because they don't have to determine who's eligible, it saves them a lot of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
In a lot of programs in the US, actually, when you try and the efforts that are taken to root out people who might not be eligible or who might be overclaiming the system actually cost more than just paying for those people.
Really?
Outright.
Right. Yeah, it's like some of the other programs also that they have for like pregnant women and so on. It's just like a cost benefit analysis. Like it costs us less to take care of them now than it would to clean it up later, after, all of that has gone down. But Ian, I think we have to, start letting you go here. I'm going to twist your arm if I can grab you for like another 10 minutes just to do the bonus segment. But thank you so much. This conversation has to continue and be continuous, like many of the different things we've talked about, not so much like, the war stories that we've maybe been sharing, but some of these other big topics we're going to have to get into another time. And I hope that we can have you in the studio at some point once we get that up and running and continue this conversation. And before we go, I just want to remind everybody, please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you're interested in supporting the stream, there's a link to our Patreon down in the description. And Ian, do you have anything you'd like to plug before we go for the night?
I'll just do one brief plug, and that's I know there's starting to be a little bit of controversy around mask wearing and all that. It's the thing about masks is it's not like I don't wear a mask to protect myself. Like the only way to protect myself is for a full respirator and a face shield. That's not what it's about. It's about putting something over my face so that when I breathe or cough or sneeze or talk or sing loudly, as I'm prone to do when I've been drinking, that I don't expel respiratory droplets all the way across the room and potentially infect people. So really, it's the importance of a mask is to protect other people. And it's not like a bravery thing or anything like that. I mean, even if it was if somebody goes out on target and takes the plates out of their plate carrier, I'm like, that's not a brave move. It's dumb.
Yeah.
You're just becoming a liability for the other guys of their team. So I'd say that's my one plug. I'll do a public health plug.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Well, and it's just become so politicized now that some people are just they're taking a stand because they feel in a corner when really it's not about that, and it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that it's become about that.
Yeah.
And guys, we will join you again next Friday. Our guest, it was going to be my friend John Stryker Mayer, who served in Nec V SOG in Vietnam. He had a family emergency, so we rescheduled him for September. John's welcome on the show anytime. Awesome dude. Instead, we're going to have John Mullins, who ironically also Nec V SOG officer at one point. He was the inspiration for the Soldier of Fortune video games, which some of us, at least one of the three of us played as a teenager.
Maybe two.
And he served as a security consultant all over the world after his SF career. So we'll have an interesting conversation with him next week. So thank you, Ian. Thanks, Dave. And
thanks, Ian. We really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody, for your support. Please like and share the video and comment down in the comment section. Thanks, Ian.